Hello, and welcome to another episode of Real World Analytics, or What Schools Don't Teach You. This is the second installment of my second Kaggle series. Unlike my first adventures in Kaggle, this is the more traditional Kaggle problem statement, where there's a metric and you're trying to create an algorithm to have the best metric. In this case, it's the root mean squared error of the log of house prices relative to predictive values, and so the smaller the better. I've managed to get my first predictions up and running and scored. I'm in the top 1,000, which out of 5,000 isn't so bad. And you may ask, well, are you going to push it? Are you going to try to optimize your Kaggle score? No, because first of all, I don't think it's worth it. I've explained this in my Kaggle video. I'll link to it at the end of this one. And secondly, if I look at the results, there's someone with a root mean squared error of 0. So it's a sum of non-negative numbers. I'm not going to beat 0. I'm not going to try. Congratulations to the person with 0. Well done. You've clearly demonstrated your understanding of optimization. So looking at that result and my result, while I'm not going to push it, I do want to bring your attention to all of the different kernels that are there for this competition. And I really do encourage you, if you're interested in data science, to go and have a look around, because it's free to access. A lot of the kernels are really well written. To be honest, I was going to use support vector machines anyway, and I found a nice kernel in R Markdown that had the support vector machine code. Looking at it, it was pretty much exactly what I was going to do. The only difference is this kernel is in base R, whereas I use the tidyverse. I'll put up both versions of code so you can see the difference. It really only makes a difference in the data filtering, but it's a lot shorter in tidyverse. So I encourage you to look at the differences. And if you're familiar with tidyverse, it will be straightforward. And if you're more familiar with base R, you can compare and contrast the two that I'll have on the screen now. So when I was looking at all the kernels, and I really appreciate that everyone has made all these public. They're very well written. The code is clear for all the ones I looked at anyway. But as I go through them, they're all technical. None of these are what I would consider suitable for me to submit to my manager, or if I was in a managerial position, something that I would like to see. So I've decided to take the kernel I'm going to write, in fact, break it into two. I'm going to have a technical kernel and then a business kernel, if you will. And the technical kernel is going to follow the same structure and outline as my business kernel, but I want to change the focus and the outlook. I'll even change the algorithm that I'm going to be using in the business kernel, which will probably give me a worse result. And you may say, well, if it's going to give you a worse result, why are you going to do that? So I spoke to a former stakeholder, someone that I had a previous business relationship with, who, as it happens, wants to have a model for house prices used. And I spoke to him about the types of things he was interested in, and really had a bit of a discussion with him about how a model for house prices would help him in his current role. I'm waiting for him to get kind of clearance from his organization to talk about it more freely, so I won't talk much about what he wants and the metrics he's concerned with, but I will tell you that the metric that he didn't mention was the root mean squared error of the log of house prices. And even this metric of the root mean squared error of the log of house prices, the Kaggle Competition says that it's so that low value homes and high value homes, when you make an error, then the two are comparable, the two have equal weight. But from a business point of view, if I look at this metric, and if I'm off by 10%, from an academic point of view, if you're fitting a function, off by 10% is off by 10%, they're equal. Now, the least expensive house price in here was about $35,000, and the most expensive was about $750,000. So 10% of the $750,000 house is equivalent to 2 houses of the cheapest one. Now, in a business context, that disparity in terms of dollars is probably going to be important. So whether or not Kaggle is even using the right metric is something that I'd like you to consider as a data scientist. So from here, the metric that Kaggle presents may or may not be appropriate. Certainly for purposes of a competition and to test your regression knowledge, it works. But if you're going into data science, I encourage you to go and talk to your stakeholders and see what type of metrics is good for them. Now, I say talk to, but actually my challenge is for you to say as little as possible, to ask questions. Questions like, tell me about what you're working on. Tell me about this model you're using. Tell me about how you use the outcome of the model. Tell me about the difficulties you face with the model. Is it not accurate enough? Does it take too long? And if you just try to ask more questions, because talking to business stakeholders is something that a lot of data scientists find difficult. So one way around that is to just listen. Don't talk to them, listen to them. And if you take one of the kernels that you particularly enjoy, if you go to them with the kernel and say, what do you think about this document? Is this a document that you could run up the chain? And after I get my kernels written, you could even compare and contrast and say, is there anything I like more about this one than that one? If you have your own template for how you report data science, I'd be interested to hear as to how it compares to what I'm going to be submitting and how it compares to all the other kernels that you find on Kaggle. So I am interested to hear from you how you think about these kernels, how you think about business documentation versus technical documentation, and if you just have any other comments or stories. Stories are always fun. I'd appreciate hearing about them in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Real World Analytics, What Schools Don't Teach You. Goodbye.